They always held these family dinners at Halbrook's, the restaurant my grandfather built with his own two hands 50 years ago, back when it was a modest diner with a flickering neon sign and a single stove in the back. Now it's a full-fledged, family-owned steakhouse, the pride of the town, or at least of my mother, Martha. Martha Hale doesn't sit at these dinners. She presides, head of the table, always dressed like she stepped off a political campaign flyer, always 5 minutes early to make sure no one forgets who's in charge. And every time I'm here, I remember why I usually stay away. I sat at the far end, napkin in my lap, pretending the menu needed reading, but I already knew it by heart. I used to work in this kitchen after school, back when I thought being useful would earn me respect. The clink of silverware and the smell of seared beef filled the air, but none of it dulled the tension I felt in my gut. I glanced around, my sister Nina whispering to her kids, trying not to make eye contact with me. Dad Thomas was sipping red wine in silence, his eyes dulled from years of keeping peace by keeping quiet. Then there was my mother, across from me, gaze sharp and smile tight. She didn't bother waiting for dessert. Well, Martha said, tipping her glass toward me, Ethan's graced us with his presence. And just like that, the show began. Tell us, Ethan, she continued, her voice syrupy with sarcasm. How's the thrilling life of a high school science teacher treating you? Any breakthroughs lately? Any Nobel Prizes we should toast to? A few chuckles rippled through the table. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. This was her thing, taking subtle digs and daring me to take the bait. She liked to make it seem like she was just joking. And if I ever pushed back, well, then I was the sensitive one, the troublemaker, the failure. She wasn't finished. Such a shame, Martha went on, swirling her wine. How someone with such potential chose to hide behind chalkboards and petri dishes. You had every advantage. And yet, here we are. My sister shifted uncomfortably, mouthing something to one of her kids to distract them. Dad stared down into his glass like it might rescue him. I'd been through this before, dozens of times. Same table, same scene, same script. Your disappointment, Ethan, Martha said finally, with the smug satisfaction of someone declaring a universal truth. You could have been anything, but instead you're, what? A background character in your own life. I took a breath, a deep one, not to argue, not to explode, just to stay, because tonight something felt different. I didn't know what, but something was building, pressing, waiting to break. And then came the silence, that sharp, unnatural quiet that slices through a crowded room like cold wind. A chair scraped at the other end of the table. Grandpa Henry, who'd been silent the whole night, slowly pushed back and stood. His joints creaked, but his voice didn't. That's enough, he said, soft but clear, like thunder under your feet before the sky splits open. The table fell dead silent. Even Martha blinked, startled. Henry rested his hands on the back of his chair. His eyes, faded but fierce, looked down the table straight at her. Martha, he said, using her name like a gavel. It's time this family hears the truth. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Grandpa Henry hadn't spoken more than a dozen words at a family dinner in years. Everyone always said it was age, but I knew better. Henry was the kind of man who chose silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was waiting for the moment when what he said would matter. And now, here he was, standing tall, his frame frail but unshaking. I've watched this family, he said, for a long time now. I've watched us pretend, and I've watched us ignore. But what I won't watch anymore is the way we treat Ethan. Martha's eyes narrowed. Dad, no. He lifted a hand to stop her cold. You've had your say every dinner, every holiday. Every time that boy walks through the door, you dress him down like it's your God-given right. She started, voice sharp. He's what? Grandpa Henry snapped. Not your puppet? Not the golden child you imagined in your head? Or is it that he reminds you of what you lost? Silence again. Nina looked like she was about to faint. Dad still said nothing, but his hand, I noticed, had stopped trembling around the wine glass. Henry turned to me. Ethan, he said gently, do you remember the summer of '09? When the restaurant nearly went under? I blinked. Of course I remembered. I was 16. I'd overheard arguments, saw the books, the tension between Martha and Dad. The line cooks were unpaid for weeks. We almost lost the business. I nodded slowly. You know who kept us afloat? Henry asked the table. You all assumed it was Martha's clever cost-cutting, or Thomas finding a miracle investor. But none of you ever bothered to check the documents. Martha stood. This is ridiculous. Ethan was a teenager, Henry echoed, who took the numbers you all ignored and found a way to fix them, who discovered fraudulent invoices from a supplier and stopped the bleeding before anyone else even knew we were hemorrhaging, who helped me renegotiate with 3 vendors behind closed doors because I was the only one who actually listened to him. I froze. He remembered? Back then, I thought it had just been a quiet favor. I'd never told anyone. I found the mistake while cleaning up the office. I'd gone to Henry because I didn't think Mom would believe me. And apparently I was right. You never gave him credit, Henry said to Martha. You dismissed him as a quiet boy who kept to himself. But the truth is, Ethan saved us. The room began to stir whispers, heads turning, forks frozen midair. Nina looked at me like I was a stranger. Check the files in the office safe, Henry said, looking at her. The receipts, the drafts. His name is on the notes. He saved this restaurant, and none of you ever even said thank you. Martha was crimson now, her expression a storm. You've gone senile, she snapped. But no one laughed. Even Thomas quiet. Conflict averse. Thomas was staring at her now. Something in his face had shifted. I remember the safe, he said quietly. The yellow folders. I thought they were yours, Dad. No, Henry said. They were Ethan's. He wrote them. He brought them to me. My hands were clenched under the table. I didn't want to cry. Not in front of her. Not in front of them. But damn, if I didn't feel like I was 12 again, desperate for someone to see me. Martha slammed her napkin onto the table. So what? He played with spreadsheets. Big deal. I ran this place. You ran it into the ground, Henry said, steel in his voice. And when the foundation cracked, it was Ethan who quietly filled it. While you stood in front of customers, smiling like nothing was wrong. The weight of truth pressed into every corner of the room. Even Nina looked shaken. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Why? Why didn't anyone ever say anything? Because no one wanted to admit it, Henry said. Because it's easier to praise the loud ones and ignore the quiet ones. But tonight, that ends. He turned back to me and nodded, almost like a salute. You don't owe them anything, Ethan, but they owe you the truth. And then he sat. For the first time in my life, I saw Martha speechless. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The air inside Halbrooks had turned electric thick with disbelief, guilt, and something even more dangerous, recognition. For the first time in my life, my mother Martha didn't have a counter ready. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they'd gone pale. She sat down with the stiffness of someone trying to hide that they'd just lost control of the room. Nina leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Grandpa Henry remained still, watching quietly like a man who had finally laid down a burden. I took a sip of water. My throat was dry, my palms damp. Everyone was looking at me now, the quiet one. The underachiever. The teacher no one took seriously unless their kids were failing chemistry. And for the first time, I didn't flinch under their gaze. So, Martha finally said, voice low but sharp, we're just rewriting history now, is that it? It's not rewriting, I replied, calm despite the storm inside. It's correcting. She let out a short, cold laugh. You're seriously going to act like you saved this place? You were 16. 16. Old enough to do the work no one else was willing to do, I said, and young enough to still think it might matter. The table shifted. A glass clinked. Somewhere in the kitchen, a dish shattered. No one moved. You always thought I owed you something, I continued. But what you never understood was that I gave you everything I had, hoping one day you'd see me as more than just the son who didn't fit into your vision of success. Martha's fingers twitched against her napkin. You think I didn't have pressure? Expectations? You have no idea what it's like, trying to keep a family name alive. No, I said. I just lived with the consequences of what happened when you almost let it die. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. Nina broke the silence. Is it true? She asked Grandpa Henry, her voice unsteady. Everything you said? Henry nodded. Every word. I had no idea, she murmured, turning toward me. Why didn't you tell us, Ethan? I shrugged. I figured if you wanted to know who I was, you'd have asked. Nina looked down at her lap. I used to think you were just distant, she said. Hard to connect with. I was surviving, I replied. That doesn't leave much room for bonding. Thomas cleared his throat. He hadn't spoken since confirming the existence of the files, but now he looked between me and Martha like someone who had finally realized he couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. I remember that summer, he said. Things were bad, and I let Martha take the reins. I didn't look at the numbers. I didn't ask questions. I just stepped back. Martha turned to him sharply. So now you're blaming me? I'm blaming myself, he said quietly, for not standing up, for not standing up for him. For a moment, she looked genuinely hurt, like something cracked through her defenses, but then she caught herself. She straightened her spine, turned her attention back to me. You think this makes you a hero? She said. You fixed some books. So what? Running a family takes more than spreadsheets. I looked at her, heart thudding. I never asked to be a hero, I said. I just didn't want to be the villain in your story. And then I stood. I don't need your apology, Martha, but I do need you to stop calling me a disgrace. The words hung there final and heavy. A declaration. A line in the sand. Grandpa Henry nodded once in approval. I always told myself that speaking up would tear this family apart, he said quietly. But keeping silent did more damage than any truth ever could. Martha looked like she was shrinking into herself, but whether it was shame or stubbornness, I couldn't tell. The woman who had always held the room in her grip now sat silent, while the rest of us looked at each other with the kind of raw honesty that families like ours rarely allowed. I turned to go. Ethan, Nina said softly. Wait, I paused. Thank you, she said, for everything. I gave her a small nod. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew this much. I had finally spoken, and they had finally listened, even if only for tonight. I didn't storm out of Halbrook's that night. I walked. It wasn't dramatic or defiant. It was something far quieter, heavier, like setting down a backpack I'd carried too long, only to realize it had been filled with stones that weren't mine. The parking lot was nearly empty. My car sat under the old, flickering sign that hadn't worked since I was 12. I stopped under it, tilted my head toward the sky, and breathed for the first time in what felt like years. Inside, the silence I left behind must have been louder than any slam of a door. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls, all from Nina. I didn't answer. I needed space. But her text came a few minutes later anyway. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Can we talk? She didn't pressure me, didn't guilt me, just left the door open. It was unfamiliar. And maybe that's why I replied. Later. Not no. Not never. Later. At school, I ran into Miss S. Greeley, the cafeteria manager. She waved me over with a smile and handed me a foil-wrapped container. Leftover lasagna, she said, pressing it into my hands. Something tells me you could use a win this week. I thanked her. And suddenly, I was blinking harder than I'd like to admit. It's strange how the smallest acts of kindness can cut deeper than cruelty, especially when you've gone numb from the latter. By Thursday, I was back in class, back in the routine, and back in my own skin. Kind of. That's when Thomas showed up, at the school, just after the last bell. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, like he wasn't sure if he belonged in the building. I asked the front desk if you were free, he said when I approached. They said you were done for the day. I nodded, crossing my arms. What do you want? He didn't answer right away. He was holding something, a manila envelope, bent at the corner. I went home, he said, and I opened the safe. I said nothing. You were 16, he added. 16. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't believe it until you saw the papers? No, he admitted. I think part of me did. I just didn't want to face what that meant. He held out the envelope. I made copies, in case you ever want to tell your own side of the story. I took the envelope but didn't look inside. Not yet. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. Your mom's not doing great, he said. Because she got caught. Or because she finally realized, I asked. Thomas winced. I don't know, he said. Maybe both. She still thinks I made it about her, I said. Still thinks I humiliated her. Maybe she feels humiliated because she was wrong, he said. And now everyone sees it. I looked at him. Where was this version of you 10 years ago? He didn't flinch, buried under fear. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he added, I should have stood up for you. I nodded. Yes, you should have. I'm sorry, Ethan. This time, I didn't nod. I just let the words settle. Because sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's the first brick in a bridge. That night, I found an old notebook in my closet. The one I used to scribble down business ledgers and delivery times when I worked at Halbrook's after school. It was all in there. My teenage handwriting, shaky and cramped, recording orders and cross-checking invoices like a kid solving puzzles in the dark. I ran my fingers over the pages. All those nights I stayed up helping Henry. All the mornings I got ignored at the table. They didn't forget. They just never asked. Until now, Friday came, and with it, Nina. She showed up at my apartment with coffee and her youngest asleep in the back seat of her car. I know you said later, she said, but I figured I'd gamble on today. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the couch like she'd been holding something in for years. I kept thinking about all the times I laughed at Mom's jabs, she said. All the times I said nothing. You weren't the worst, I said. That doesn't mean I was good, she replied. I looked at her, the little sister who used to steal the last slice of pie, who used to ask me to help with homework and cry when I told her no, the one who stopped asking somewhere around middle school. I didn't want to believe you were struggling, she said, because if I believed it, I'd have to do something about it. And I was tired. I sighed. So was I. She handed me the coffee. I'm sorry, Ethan. I took a sip. It was bitter, but warm. Me too, I said. And we sat there, two grown siblings, in a quiet apartment, finally telling the truth in ways we never learned as kids. That weekend, I walked past Halbrook's. Lights on, customers inside. I didn't go in, but I did stop and stare. The sign above the door still bore the name Hale Family Restaurant. But for the first time, I saw that name and didn't flinch. Because now, people knew the truth, and no one could erase that. A week after the storm passed through my family, something strange happened. A letter showed up at my doorstep. Handwritten. No return address. The cursive on the envelope looked too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had spent an hour on every loop and tail. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Martha. I set it on the table, left it there, let it stare at me for 3 days. And then one morning, just after feeding Basil and starting a pot of coffee, I opened it. Ethan, this will not be a long letter. I don't have the words for that, not anymore. You've always had a way with clarity. I've always had a way with control. I suppose that's why we've spent so long misunderstanding each other. I've been angry, but not just at you, at myself, at time, at the way I imagined this family would look and how far from that dream we've drifted. I see now that I clung to appearances, to legacy, to some version of pride that blinded me to what was right in front of me, a son who never asked to be celebrated, only to be seen. I paused, eyes skimming back over the last sentence. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from her. I told myself I was shaping you, that I was pushing you. But really, I was projecting, trying to mold you into the only version of success I ever understood. I didn't know how to love a son who wasn't me, who was better than me. Your grandfather told the truth that night. You saved us. And I erased that from the story because I didn't know how to give up the pen. You don't owe me a reply, but you deserve to know that I am trying to be different, that I am learning, Martha, not Mom. Martha, that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't pretending this time. She wasn't falling back into the role of mother as title, weapon, or excuse. Just Martha, a woman. A person trying, late as it was. I folded the letter and slipped it into the top drawer of my desk. Not as a keepsake, as a milestone. Weeks passed, then months. My life didn't change dramatically. I didn't move away or burn bridges. I didn't mend every relationship. But the air around me felt lighter. The unspoken rules that once governed every family dinner, gone. Thomas started texting me once a week. Nothing big, usually just thinking of you or how's Basil. Nina came by often, sometimes with her kids, sometimes with stories of her own past regrets. I listened, and when she offered to help clean out Grandpa Henry's old study, I said yes, because cleaning up wasn't just about dust. It was about honoring the truth. As for Martha, we didn't talk much. But one Sunday afternoon, I passed by Halbrook's, and through the front window, I saw her standing behind the counter, staring at the register like it was a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. And for the first time, she looked human, not sharp, not untouchable. Just a woman grappling with what it meant to lead and to fail. She didn't see me. I didn't go in. But I didn't look away either. In April, on the anniversary of the night it all changed, Grandpa Henry hosted a small dinner. This time, at his house. No fanfare, no scripted toasts. Just family. The ones who chose to show up, not out of duty but desire. Henry pulled me aside afterward. handed me a small envelope with a note inside. His handwriting had grown shakier, but the words were unmistakably his. Thank you for being the kind of man this family needed, and for forgiving us when we didn't deserve it yet. I looked up at him, and he just nodded. That was enough. People always say the truth sets you free. What they don't tell you is that it doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like chaos, like grief, like losing the version of yourself you had to be just to survive. But after that, after you breathe through the storm and face what's been festering in the dark, you don't just find freedom, you find yourself. I still teach chemistry, still live in the same apartment, though I'm saving for a small house on the edge of town, one with a backyard for Basil, maybe a little garden. The school principal pulled me aside a few weeks ago, asked if I'd consider helping redesign the science curriculum for next year. Funny, isn't it? For so long, I let other people write my story. Now, they were asking me to shape someone else's. I said yes, because I'm finally ready, not just to teach, but to lead, on my terms.